Nathan Hayes stood in the pouring rain, watching the black car pull away with the only woman he had ever loved inside it. His lungs burned, his hands shook, and every excuse he had spent 15 years building, that he wasn't enough, that she deserved better, that a mechanic raising a daughter alone had no business loving a woman who ran a company worth millions. Every single one of those lies collapsed in the space of a single heartbeat. He ran. He ran like a man who finally understood that the worst thing in the world wasn't rejection. It was silence. If this story hits you the way it hit me, stay until the very end. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Now, let me take you back to where it all started. Now, Part 1. The morning light came through the kitchen window at an angle that made the cracked tile above the sink look almost intentional, like something from one of those home renovation shows where they call damage character. Nathan Hayes didn't care about the tile. He cared about the fact that his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, had decided, for the third morning in a row, that she no longer ate toast. "It's crunchy," Lily said, pushing the plate away with 2 fingers like it personally offended her. "Toast is supposed to be crunchy. That's the whole point of toast." "I don't like the point of toast." Nathan leaned against the counter, coffee in hand, and stared at her. She stared back. She had her mother's eyes, wide and dark and stubborn in a way that made arguing feel pointless. Claire had the same look back when she was still around, before she decided that being a mother wasn't something she wanted to keep doing. What if I put peanut butter on it? What if you made pancakes? What if you're already late for school? Lily considered this. She picked up the toast, bit into it with exaggerated misery, and chewed like she was doing him the world's biggest favor. Nathan watched her eat and felt the familiar pull in his chest, that mixture of love and exhaustion and low-grade terror that came with raising a kid alone. He was 32 years old. He worked 6 days a week at Garrison's Auto Repair on Main Street. He drove a truck with 180,000 miles on it. He hadn't been on a date in 3 years, and the last one had ended when the woman across the table asked what his 5-year plan was, and he'd said, "Keep Lily alive and maybe fix the porch railing." She did not call back. He didn't blame her. "Dad, you're staring again," Lily said through a mouthful of toast. "I'm admiring your chewing technique." "You're weird." "I know." He grabbed her backpack off the hook by the door, checked that her lunchbox was zipped, and walked her out to the truck. The street was quiet the way small towns outside Burlington always were on weekday mornings. A few cars, someone walking a dog, the faint sound of a lawnmower 3 blocks over. The houses on Maple Ridge Lane were old but decent, the kind of neighborhood where people still waved from their porches and nobody locked their doors until 10 at night. Across the street, the Carter house sat behind a low stone wall and a yard that had gone soft with neglect. The shutters needed paint. The garden Helen Carter used to tend with religious devotion had thinned into patches of wildflowers and crabgrass. The driveway was empty. It had been empty for years, ever since Helen's health started going downhill and Olivia stopped coming home. Nathan looked at the house the way he always did, quickly, like checking a wound he didn't want to admit still hurt. He buckled Lily into her booster seat, climbed behind the wheel, and drove. The shop smelled the way it always smelled: oil, metal, and the ghost of 10,000 burned clutches. Garrison's Auto Repair had been on Main Street since 1974, a squat brick building with 3 bays and a waiting room that still had magazines from 2019. Tom Garrison had retired 2 years ago, leaving the business to his nephew, Derek, who ran it with the organizational skill of a man who kept his schedule on napkins. Nathan didn't mind. He liked the work. He liked the simplicity of it. Something was broken. You figured out why. You fixed it. There was a satisfaction in that, a cleanness that the rest of his life didn't have. Cars didn't lie to you. Cars didn't promise to stay and then disappear in the middle of the night with a note on the kitchen table that said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore." He was elbow deep in the transmission of a 2014 Subaru when Derek wandered over with 2 cups of coffee and a look on his face that meant gossip. "So," Derek said, leaning against the workbench, "you hear about the Carter house?" Nathan didn't look up. "What about it?" "Helen's daughter is coming back. Olivia. The one who went to Boston and got all rich and important. Nathan's hand stopped moving for exactly 1 second. Then he reached for a socket wrench and kept working. Who told you that? Linda at the post office. She heard it from Margaret Cho at the pharmacy. Apparently Helen had some kind of episode last week, and Olivia's flying in to take care of her. An episode. Heart thing. I don't know the details. Point is, Olivia Carter is coming back to town. That's news, right? I mean, when's the last time she was here? Nathan knew exactly when the last time was. 4 years ago. Helen's 70th birthday party. Olivia had flown in from Boston on a Friday, stayed through Sunday, and left Monday morning before Nathan was awake. He knew because he'd seen the rental car pull away from his bedroom window at 5:47 a.m. while Lily slept in the next room. He'd stood there in his boxers and a t-shirt, watching the taillights disappear, and thought about calling her. He didn't. It's been a while, Nathan said. Derek studied him. You two used to be close, right? Back in school? We were neighbors. That's not what I asked. That's what I answered. Derek raised his hands. Fine. Just making conversation. He paused. She's probably married by now anyway. Rich CEO lady like that. Nathan tightened a bolt and said nothing. Charchette. Olivia Carter arrived in Vermont on a Tuesday afternoon in a rented silver Audi that looked absurdly out of place on Maple Ridge Lane. She parked in the driveway of her mother's house, sat in the car for 3 full minutes, and stared at the front door like it might open on its own and save her the trouble of going inside. It didn't. She had driven straight from the airport with her phone on silent, her laptop bag in the trunk, and a headache that had started somewhere over Connecticut and hadn't stopped. She was wearing a charcoal blazer, black pants, and shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent, an outfit designed for boardrooms and investor dinners, not for sitting in a cracked driveway in front of the house where she'd learned to ride a bike. She looked at the garden. It was a mess. Her mother would have been horrified by how it looked, which meant her mother hadn't been well enough to care for it in a long time, which meant Olivia should have come home sooner, which meant she pressed her palms against her eyes and breathed. Her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. 17 emails. 3 missed calls from her COO. A text from her assistant that read, "Board meeting rescheduled to Thursday. Please confirm." She typed, "Handling a family emergency. Will be unavailable for the rest of the week. Do not reschedule without checking with me first." Then she got out of the car and walked inside. The house smelled like lavender and something faintly medicinal. The living room was clean but sparse. Her mother had been downsizing quietly, getting rid of things piece by piece, as if she'd known what was coming. The couch was new. The bookshelves were half empty. On the mantel above the fireplace, a row of framed photos tracked Olivia's life from a gap-toothed 7-year-old in pigtails to a woman shaking hands with a senator at a fundraiser. There were no photos of Olivia's father. That was intentional. Helen Carter was in the back bedroom, propped up against 2 pillows, watching a nature documentary about whales. She was 74, small and thin in a way she hadn't been a year ago, her white hair pinned loosely behind her ears. An oxygen tube ran from a portable tank to her nose. A plastic organizer of medications sat on the nightstand, each compartment labeled by day and time. She looked up when Olivia appeared in the doorway, and her face did something complicated. Relief and guilt and joy, and the kind of sadness that comes from knowing your child flew across the country because you might be dying. "You didn't have to come," Helen said. Olivia dropped her bag on the floor, crossed the room, and sat on the edge of the bed. "Don't start. I mean it. I told Dr. Moran not to call you." "He didn't. Margaret at the pharmacy told Linda at the post office, who told your neighbor, who texted my assistant, who called me during a merger negotiation. So technically, you're right. The doctor didn't call me." Helen's mouth twitched. Small towns. Small towns. They looked at each other. Olivia reached over and adjusted the oxygen tube, which had slipped slightly. Her fingers were steady. Her face was not. "How bad is it?" Olivia asked. "It's manageable." "Mom?" They're saying the valve isn't functioning the way it should. They want to do a procedure, catheter-based, minimally invasive. Dr. Moran says the success rate is high." "How high?" 85%. And the other 15? Helen looked at the whales on the television. Let's not talk about the other 15. Olivia wanted to argue. She wanted to demand specifics, second opinions, the best cardiac surgeon in the northeastern United States. She wanted to do what she always did, take control, build a strategy, eliminate risk. But sitting on this bed in this room in this house, she wasn't a CEO. She was a daughter whose mother's heartbeat had become unreliable. I'm staying, Olivia said, until the procedure, until you're recovered, however long that takes. Olivia, your company will survive without me for a few weeks. I have a team. That's what I pay them for. Helen studied her daughter's face with the careful attention of a woman who had spent 30 years learning how to read the things Olivia didn't say. You look tired. I'm fine. You always say that. Because I'm always fine. Liar, Helen said gently. Olivia smiled. It was a thin smile, the kind she wore in conference rooms when someone proposed something stupid and she needed a moment to decide how honest to be. But underneath it, Helen could see something cracking, something that had been held together too tightly for too long. I'll make dinner, Olivia said, standing up. What do you feel like? Anything you want, sweetheart. I'm just happy you're here. Olivia nodded, turned, and walked down the hall toward the kitchen. She made it 3 steps past the bathroom before she pressed her back against the wall, covered her mouth with her hand, and cried without making a sound. Nathan found out Olivia was back the way he found out most things, by accident. He was loading groceries into his truck outside the Shop and Save when he saw her through the window of the pharmacy across the street. She was standing at the counter, talking to Margaret, holding a white paper bag that probably contained 6 prescriptions for Helen. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, cut to just below her shoulders. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that looked expensive but not flashy. She looked exactly like herself, except also like someone who had been running on caffeine and willpower for about 3 years too long. He stood there with a bag of groceries in each hand, watching her through a plate glass window, like a man who had never learned how to just walk across a street and say hello. Then she turned and saw him. For a moment, neither of them moved. The street between them was maybe 40 feet wide, but it might as well have been an ocean. She raised her hand, a small wave, almost tentative, nothing like the decisive woman who ran boardrooms and negotiated deals worth millions. He raised his hand back, and then she smiled. It was the real one. Not the boardroom smile, not the polite smile she gave to strangers, but the one he remembered from when they were 17 and used to sit on the roof of her mother's porch and talk about everything and nothing until 2 in the morning. The smile that made him feel like the luckiest kid in a town full of people who didn't know how lucky he was. Something inside Nathan's chest opened up, and he shut it down immediately. He walked across the street. Hey, he said. Hey, she said. They stood on the sidewalk outside the pharmacy, 2 people who had known each other their entire lives and had absolutely no idea what to say. I heard about your mom, Nathan said finally. How is she? She's okay. They want to do a procedure, catheter thing. She's acting like it's nothing, but Olivia stopped herself. She was doing the thing she always did when emotions got close to the surface, organizing them into neat sentences that kept the mess contained. But you're scared, Nathan said. She looked at him. Yeah, I'm scared. He nodded. He didn't say it was going to be fine. He didn't say he was sure the doctors knew what they were doing. He just stood there and let her be scared, and for some reason, that was the most useful thing anyone had done for her in months. Lily's good, he said, changing the subject because he could see she needed him to. She's in 1st grade now. She's decided she hates toast, which is a new development. Olivia laughed, a real laugh, short and surprised. She was so tiny the last time I saw her. She's not tiny anymore. She's got opinions about everything. Yesterday, she told me my haircut made me look like a tired wolf. She's not wrong. Thanks. They were grinning at each other now, and it felt easy in a way that made Nathan nervous, because easy was dangerous. Easy was how you started thinking about things you couldn't have. Listen, Olivia said, I know you're probably busy, but would you want to come by sometime? My mom would love to see you. She asks about you every time I call. Helen asks about me. She thinks you hung the moon, Nathan. She always has. He looked down at his groceries, then back at her. Yeah, I'll come by, maybe this weekend. Saturday? Saturday works. Okay. She nodded, clutching the pharmacy bag against her chest. It's good to see you. It's good to see you too, Liv. She turned and walked toward her car, and Nathan stood on the sidewalk watching her go, and he thought about how stupid it was that after 15 years, after everything, the sound of his own voice saying her name still felt like something private and sacred that he wasn't supposed to say out loud. Saturday came faster than Nathan was ready for. He spent 20 minutes that morning trying to decide what to wear, which was 20 minutes more than he usually spent, which was a fact he refused to examine. He settled on a clean flannel shirt and jeans because that was what he wore every day, and showing up in something different would look like he was trying, and trying would look like he cared. And caring would lead to a conversation he had successfully avoided for most of his adult life. Lily came with him. She wore her favorite dress, the purple one with tiny dinosaurs on it, and carried a card she had made for the sick lady across the street. The card featured a crayon drawing of a heart with legs and a speech bubble that said, "Feel better or else." Nathan didn't ask what the "or else" meant. They walked across the street at 4 in the afternoon. Olivia opened the door before they knocked. "I saw you coming from the window," she said, then looked embarrassed about admitting that. "We brought a card," Lily announced, holding it up. Olivia took it, read it, and pressed her lips together to keep from laughing. "This is the best card I've ever seen. Can I show my mom?" "Obviously. That's why I made it." They went inside. The house smelled like soup and something baking. Olivia had clearly been cooking, and from the flower on her sleeve and the slightly panicked look in her eyes, it hadn't gone smoothly. "I made bread," she said to Nathan in a low voice as they walked toward Helen's room. "Or I tried to. I think it might be a brick." "You run a company worth, what, $100 million? 200. $200 million, and you can't make bread. Bread is harder than running a company. In a company, people do what you tell them. Dough does whatever it wants." Helen was sitting up in bed, looking better than she had on Tuesday. She had color in her cheeks and a sharpness in her eyes that suggested the oxygen and the medications were doing their job. When she saw Nathan walk in, her whole face lit up. "Nathan Hayes, get over here and let me look at you." He sat in the chair beside her bed, and she took his hand and squeezed it. Her fingers were thin and cool, but her grip was firm. "You look good," she said. "You're a terrible liar, Helen." "I'm an excellent liar. I just choose to be kind." She looked at Lily, who was examining the whale documentary with intense focus. "And this must be Lily. Your dad talks about you every time I see him." "He stares at me when I eat," Lily said without looking away from the screen. Helen laughed, a bright, clear sound that seemed to fill the room. Nathan noticed Olivia standing in the doorway, watching her mother laugh, and the expression on her face was so raw and grateful that he had to look away. They stayed for 2 hours. Helen told stories about the old neighborhood, about the time Nathan and Olivia tried to build a treehouse, and it collapsed on the first day, about the summer they ran a lemonade stand and accidentally used salt instead of sugar, about the winter they got snowed in and the whole street had a potluck in the Carters' living room. Lily listened with the fascination of a child hearing legends about her father's life before she existed. Olivia sat on the floor by her mother's bed, her back against the nightstand, her knees drawn up. She was quiet in a way that Nathan recognized. She was storing this, cataloging the details, the sound of her mother's voice, the way the light hit the pillows, the specific warmth of a room full of people she loved. She was memorizing it, in case she needed it later. Nathan saw this, and something in his throat tightened. When they left, Olivia walked them to the door. Lily ran ahead to the sidewalk, chasing a firefly that had appeared in the early evening air. "Thank you for coming," Olivia said. She was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, backlit by the warm glow of the house behind her. "Helen's always been good to me. After my parents, she was the one who brought food over every night for a month. I remember. They were quiet. Down the street, someone was grilling. The smell of charcoal drifted across the evening. "Nathan?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad you're still here. In town, I mean. I'm glad you didn't leave." He looked at her. The light was doing something to her face that made his chest hurt, and he needed to stop standing on this porch before he said something he couldn't take back. "Where would I go?" he said, and it came out lighter than he meant it to, joking, dismissive, like a man who stayed in a small town because he had no options. Not because the woman standing in front of him had always been the reason this place felt like home. Something flickered across Olivia's face. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition, or both. But it was gone before he could name it. "Good night, Nathan." "Night, Liv." He took Lily's hand and walked back across the street, and he did not look back because looking back was the first step toward falling, and he had been balancing on this edge for 15 years, and he was not going to fall now. Not now. Not yet. The call came at 2:14 in the morning, 11 days later. Nathan was asleep, the heavy, dreamless sleep of a man who had spent 10 hours under cars. When his phone lit up on the nightstand, he grabbed it, saw Olivia's name, and felt his stomach drop before he even answered. "Nathan." Her voice was shaking. He had heard Olivia Carter speak to rooms full of investors, negotiate contracts worth tens of millions of dollars, give keynote speeches without a single note. He had never heard her voice shake. "What happened?" They're taking her in for emergency surgery. The valve, something went wrong. It's not. They said they can't wait for the scheduled procedure. They're taking her now." "Where are you?" "UVM Medical Center. I'm in the hallway. They won't let me. Nathan, they won't let me go with her." "I'm coming." "You don't have to eat." "Olivia, I'm coming." He hung up, called Derek's wife, Karen, who lived 2 blocks over and had told Nathan a dozen times to call her if he ever needed help with Lily. She showed up in a bathrobe and slippers in under 8 minutes, half asleep, and not asking a single question. He kissed Lily's forehead without waking her, grabbed his keys, and drove. The hospital was 40 minutes away. He made it in 27. He found Olivia in the surgical waiting area on the 3rd floor. She was sitting in a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that made everyone look like they were already grieving. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot. She was wearing an old college sweatshirt and the same jeans she'd been wearing when he saw her at the house earlier that day. Her phone was in her lap, but she wasn't looking at it. She looked up when he walked in, and the expression on her face nearly broke him. It was the face of a woman who had been strong her entire life and had just run out of strong. He sat down next to her. He didn't say anything. He just sat there, close enough that their shoulders were touching, and after a minute, she leaned into him and pressed her forehead against his arm and breathed. They sat like that for 3 hours. Nurses came and went. A doctor appeared once to say the surgery was progressing, that the team was doing everything they could, that they would update her as soon as there was news. Olivia nodded and said thank you in a voice so controlled it sounded rehearsed. When the doctor left, she turned to Nathan. "I should have come home sooner," she said. "I should have been here. Instead, I was in Boston, sitting in a glass office, looking at spreadsheets, and my mother was—" She stopped. "I don't even know when it got this bad. She never told me. She never said it was this serious." "She didn't want you to worry." "I know. That's what kills me. She was protecting me from the one thing I should have been here for." Nathan turned to face her. "Olivia, you didn't do anything wrong. I left, and I stayed gone. You built a life. That's not the same as leaving, isn't it?" He didn't answer because the truth was complicated, and because at 2 in the morning in a hospital waiting room, complicated truths weren't what she needed. What she needed was someone who wasn't going to disappear when the hard part came. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "Okay? I'm right here." She closed her eyes and nodded, and he could feel her shaking against his shoulder, and he wrapped one arm around her and held on. At 5:38 a.m., Dr. Moran walked into the waiting room. He looked exhausted, but not devastated, which Nathan read as the best possible sign. "She's stable," the doctor said. "The surgery went well. We were able to repair the valve, but she's going to need significant recovery time. We'll keep her in the ICU for at least 48 hours, then reassess." Olivia stood up so fast she almost knocked the chair over. "Can I see her?" "She's sedated. She won't know you're there. But yes, you can see her." Olivia turned to Nathan. Her eyes were red, her face was blotchy, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days, and she was the most beautiful person he had ever seen in his life. and he needed to stop thinking that immediately. "Thank you," she said, "for being here. You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did." She held his gaze for a second too long, and in that second, 15 years of careful distance almost evaporated. Then she turned and followed the doctor down the hall. Nathan sat back down in the plastic chair, rubbed his face with both hands, and stared at the ceiling. He was in so much trouble. Over the next 2 weeks, a pattern developed. Olivia spent her mornings at the hospital. Afternoons, she worked from her mother's house. Video calls, emails, crisis management, the relentless churn of running a company from a kitchen table with a laptop propped against a stack of old cookbooks. Evenings, she went back to the hospital. She ate badly. She slept worse. She poured coffee like it was a survival strategy. Nathan fell into step without being asked. He mowed Helen's lawn. He fixed the leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom. He replaced the porch light that had been dead for 6 months. He brought over meals 3 times a week. Nothing fancy, just the kind of food you actually eat when you're too tired to cook. Pasta, soup, casseroles that his own mother used to make before she died. Recipes he'd kept in a shoebox on top of the fridge. Lily started coming with him after school. She would sit at Helen's kitchen table and do homework while Olivia worked across from her, both of them in companionable silence that felt strangely natural. Sometimes Lily would ask Olivia questions. "What do you do?" Lily asked one afternoon, peering at Olivia's laptop screen. "I run a company." "What kind of company?" "We help other businesses figure out how to work better. It's called consulting." "That sounds boring," Olivia laughed. "It is sometimes, but I'm good at it." "My dad is good at fixing cars." "I know, he's always been good at fixing things." Lily considered this. "Are you my dad's friend?" Olivia hesitated. It was a half-second pause, barely noticeable, but Nathan noticed it from the doorway where he was standing with a wrench in one hand and a bracket for the towel rack in the other. "Yes," Olivia said. "We've been friends since we were kids." "Like, since you were my age?" "Even younger than that." "Wow, that's a long time to be friends." "It is," Olivia said quietly. "It really is." Nathan turned and went back upstairs to the bathroom, and he did not think about the way she said the word friends, and he did not think about the way it sounded like she was holding something heavier than a word. He fixed the towel rack. He tightened the bolts. He focused on things that made sense. Helen came home after 9 days. She was weaker, slower, smaller somehow, but she was alive and she was stubborn, and she immediately started complaining that the soup Olivia made was under-seasoned. "It needs more salt," Helen said from the couch, wrapped in a blanket and surrounded by pillows like a queen on a very soft throne. "The doctor said low sodium." "The doctor doesn't have to eat it." Nathan was in the kitchen, pretending to wash dishes while actually listening to them argue. It sounded exactly like it had 20 years ago, when he used to come over after school and sit at the same table and eat Helen's cookies and listen to her tell Olivia to stop running and go play outside like a normal kid. Some things didn't change. Some things just got older and more tired and more precious. His phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Lady came in with a blown head gasket. You working tomorrow or what?" Nathan typed back. "I'll be there at 7. He dried his hands, walked into the living room, and told Olivia he was heading out. She walked him to the door again. This was becoming a habit, these doorway conversations, these 3 or 4 minutes of standing too close to each other in a narrow space while the evening air came in through the screen. "She looks better," Nathan said. "She does. She's still... The doctor said the next few weeks are critical. There might be another procedure if the valve doesn't hold." "What kind of procedure?" "Open heart, the real thing, not the catheter approach." Nathan looked at her. "You okay?" Olivia leaned against the doorframe and crossed her arms, and for a moment the mask she wore, the capable, decisive, unshakable CEO mask, slipped just enough for him to see the woman underneath. Tired, frightened, desperately lonely in a way that surprised her, because she had built a life in Boston surrounded by people and still somehow ended up alone. "No," she said. "I'm not okay." He stepped closer. "Not much. An inch. Maybe 2. What do you need?" She looked up at him, and her eyes were asking a question that her mouth would never say, and he saw it clearly as he saw anything in his entire life. And he stepped back. "You should get some sleep," he said. "You look exhausted." The question in her eyes died. She nodded. "Yeah, you're right. Good night, Nathan." "Night, Liv." He walked down the porch steps and across the street and into his own house and closed the door and pressed his back against it and stood there in the dark for a long time, listening to his own heartbeat, hating himself for being the kind of man who could see exactly what someone needed and still be too afraid to give it. The call from Olivia's father came on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after Helen's surgery. Olivia was sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop open and 4 browser tabs running, quarterly projections, an investor update draft, a thread from her legal team about a contract dispute in Chicago, and a recipe for chicken soup that she was failing to follow for the second time that week. Her phone rang, and when she saw the name on the screen, her whole body changed. Her shoulders went up, her jaw tightened. She sat straighter in the chair, like a soldier hearing a command. She hadn't spoken to Richard Carter in almost 2 months. "Dad?" "Olivia." His voice was the same as always, measured, precise, the kind of voice that filled conference rooms and made junior executives sweat. Richard Carter had built his own consulting empire in New York before retiring at 60, and he spoke to everyone, including his daughter, like they were presenting a quarterly report he hadn't found impressive enough. "How's your mother?" "She's recovering. It's slow, but the doctor says—" "I spoke with Dr. Moran yesterday." Olivia paused. "You called my mother's doctor?" "I called to get the facts. You have a tendency to soften things, Olivia. You get that from her." She closed her eyes and counted to 3. "What did he tell you?" "He told me there's a strong possibility she'll need a second surgery. Open heart, more invasive, longer recovery, higher risk. He also told me she's 74 years old and that the realistic prognosis, even with surgery, is—" "I know the prognosis, Dad." "Then you know that staying in Vermont indefinitely is not a viable plan." There it was. The pivot. Richard Carter never called to check in. He called to redirect. "I'm not leaving while she's still recovering," Olivia said. "I'm not asking you to abandon your mother. I'm asking you to think rationally about what happens next. You have a company, Olivia, 240 employees, investors who backed you because they believed in your leadership, not your ability to manage things from a kitchen table in Burlington. I'm managing fine. You missed the Wexler pitch. I delegated the Wexler pitch to Sarah. She's more than capable." "She's capable. She's not you. The Wexler Group specifically asked for you, and you weren't there. That's not delegation, that's absence." Olivia stood up and walked to the window. Across the street, Nathan's truck was in the driveway. The porch light was on. She could see the blue glow of a television through the living room window, which meant Lily was still up, which meant Nathan was probably sitting on the couch with her watching something animated while pretending he wasn't falling asleep. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Olivia asked. "I'm suggesting you come back to Boston. Set up proper care for your mother, a live-in nurse, a home health aide, whatever she needs. Visit on weekends if you want. But stop putting your career on pause for a situation that has a clear medical trajectory." "A clear medical trajectory. You mean she's dying and you think I should leave?" "I think you should be strategic about how you spend the next 6 months, because the choices you make now will determine whether Carter and Finch survives this transition period or whether your board starts looking for a replacement." "Nobody is replacing me." "Not yet, but you're giving them reasons, Olivia. Every week you're not in Boston is a week someone else fills the space you left. That's how it works. You know that." She did know that. That was the worst part. Her father wasn't wrong about the business mechanics. He was wrong about everything else. About what mattered, about what she owed her mother, about the kind of life that was worth living. But the business part, the cold arithmetic of leadership and presence and perception, he was exactly right about that. And it made her want to throw the phone against the wall. "There's something else," Richard said. "Of course there is. I've heard you've been spending time with Nathan Hayes." The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. "Who told you that?" Olivia's voice was very quiet. "It doesn't matter who told me. What matters is that I know you and I know what's happening, and I need you to hear this clearly." He paused, and when he spoke again, His voice had the particular softness he used when he was about to say something devastating. Nathan is a good person. I've never said otherwise. But he's a mechanic in a small town raising a child alone, and you are a woman who built something extraordinary from nothing. Those two lives don't fit together. They never have. You don't get to decide that. I'm not deciding anything. I'm stating a fact. You went to Dartmouth. You got your MBA from Wharton. You built a company that Fortune magazine profiled twice. And Nathan stayed. He stayed in the same town, in the same job, in the same life. That's not a judgment, Olivia. Some people are built for small lives, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you're not one of them, and pretending otherwise because you're scared about your mother is going to cost you everything you've worked for. Olivia's hand was shaking. She pressed it flat against the counter and held it there until the trembling stopped. "Are you done?" she said. "I'm trying to help you. You're trying to manage me. There's a difference. You've never been able to tell the difference." She hung up before he could respond, set the phone on the counter, and stared at it like it might ring again. It didn't. Richard Carter never called twice. He said what he meant to say, and then he let silence do the rest of the work. The soup on the stove was burning. She turned off the burner, moved the pot, and stood in the middle of her mother's kitchen with her arms wrapped around herself, and she felt very small and very tired and very far from the woman who ran boardrooms and negotiated deals and never let anyone see her flinch. From the back bedroom, Helen's voice drifted down the hall. "Olivia? Is something burning?" "It's fine, Mom. Just the soup." "Again?" "Again." She heard Helen laugh softly, and the sound was so familiar and so fragile that Olivia had to grip the edge of the counter to keep herself upright. The next morning, she told Nathan about the call. They were sitting on her mother's front porch, both holding coffee, watching Lily chase the neighbor's cat across the yard. It was one of those late September mornings where the air smelled like turning leaves and the light had that golden, low-angle quality that made everything look like a photograph someone would hang in a hallway. "My father thinks I should go back to Boston," Olivia said. She said it casually, like she was reporting the weather, but Nathan heard the weight underneath. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think my mother needs me here." "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He was sitting in the old wooden chair that had been on this porch since they were teenagers, the one with the cracked slat that Helen kept meaning to replace. He was wearing his work boots and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he had grease under his fingernails that he hadn't been able to scrub out, and he looked like exactly what he was. A man who worked with his hands and didn't apologize for it. "He said some things about you," Olivia said carefully. Nathan's expression didn't change. "I can imagine." "He doesn't know you." "He knows enough. He knows I'm a mechanic. He knows I'm a single dad. He knows I didn't go to Dartmouth or build a company or end up in Fortune magazine." Nathan took a sip of his coffee. "He's not wrong about any of that, Liv. He's wrong about what it means." "Is he?" She turned to face him fully, and there was something fierce in her eyes, something that looked a lot like anger but was actually closer to desperation. "Don't do that. Don't agree with him. I'm not agreeing with him. I'm saying he's not making things up. There's a gap between your life and mine, and pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it go away." "I didn't say it doesn't exist. I said it doesn't mean what he thinks it means." Nathan set his coffee on the railing and looked out at the yard where Lily had given up on the cat and was now methodically picking dandelions and arranging them in a pile that she seemed to consider very important. "What does he want you to do?" Nathan asked. "Come back to Boston, set up a nurse for my mom, focus on the company." "And what do you want?" She was quiet for a long time, long enough that the question hung in the air between them and became something else entirely. Not just about Boston or her mother or the company, but about the two of them. About what they had been circling for years. About the thing they never said. "I want to stop feeling like I have to choose between the people I love and the life everyone expects me to live," she said finally. Nathan heard it. He heard the word people, and he knew it was plural on purpose, and he knew who she meant, and his heart did something painful and complicated that he had no intention of acknowledging. "You don't have to decide right now," he said. "That's what people say when they don't want to give you an actual answer. That's what people say when the actual answer is complicated." She studied his face the way she used to study him when they were 17, searching for the thing he wasn't saying, the thing he kept locked behind his careful, steady, polite exterior. She used to find it sometimes, a flash of something real in his eyes, a crack in the armor. But he'd gotten better at hiding it over the years. He'd had a lot of practice. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes I think the bravest thing you've ever done is raise Lily alone. And sometimes I think the most cowardly thing you've ever done is hide behind being a good guy so you never have to risk anything." It landed like a punch, clean and precise and exactly where it hurt. Nathan looked at her, and for one unguarded second she saw everything. The love, the fear, the ache of a man who wanted something so badly he'd convinced himself he didn't deserve it. Then the walls went back up, smooth and practiced, and he smiled the smile that wasn't really a smile. "I should get to work," he said, standing up. "Lily, come on, time to go." "But I'm making a garden." "You can make a garden later. Let's go." He walked down the porch steps without looking back, and Olivia sat there with her cold coffee and watched him cross the street and disappear into his house. And she thought about all the things he almost said and didn't, and she wondered how many years a person could almost say something before the almost became permanent. The days that followed carried a tension that hadn't been there before. Nathan still came over. He still fixed things, still brought meals, still sat with Helen and made her laugh. But there was a distance now, a careful spacing between him and Olivia that hadn't existed before her father's phone call. He arrived when Olivia was busy. He left before the evening conversations on the porch could start. He was polite and kind and helpful and completely unreachable, and it was driving Olivia out of her mind. Helen noticed. Of course Helen noticed. Helen had been watching these two circle each other since they were children, and she had the patience of a woman who understood that some things couldn't be rushed, but she also had the urgency of a woman who knew her time might be shorter than she wanted it to be. "He came by while you were at the hospital," Helen said one afternoon. Olivia was changing the sheets on her mother's bed, and Helen was sitting in the armchair by the window, watching the street. "Who?" "You know who, Nathan. He fixed the gutter on the east side of the house. Took him about 2 hours. Didn't charge me a cent." "He never charges you." "No, he doesn't." Helen paused. "He also asked about you." Olivia smoothed the fitted sheet over the corner of the mattress with more force than necessary. "What did he ask?" "He asked how you were sleeping. He asked if you'd been eating. He asked if your father had called again." Helen turned from the window and looked at her daughter. "That boy has been in love with you since he was 14 years old, Olivia." "Mom." "I'm not gossiping. I'm telling you something I've watched happen for almost 20 years. He loves you. He has always loved you. And you love him. And you have always loved him. And the two of you have spent your entire adult lives pretending otherwise. And I'm running out of patience with it." Olivia stopped making the bed. She stood there with a pillowcase in her hands and looked at her mother, and the expression on her face was the one she wore in board meetings when someone presented a problem she didn't have a solution for. "It's not that simple," Olivia said. "It is exactly that simple. You're making it complicated because complicated feels safer than admitting what you want." "He doesn't. He won't. Every time I get close, he pulls away. He says the right things. He shows up. He's there for me in every way except the one that matters, and I don't know how to—" She stopped. She pressed the pillowcase against her chest. "I don't know how to make someone fight for me when they've already decided I'm too much." Helen's face softened. She reached out one thin hand toward her daughter. "Come here." Olivia crossed the room and knelt beside the armchair, and Helen took her face in both hands, those cool, careful, mother's hands, and looked directly into her eyes. "Nathan doesn't think you're too much. He thinks he's not enough. Those are very different problems, sweetheart, and only one of them is his to solve." Olivia closed her eyes. "I'm scared, Mom." "Of course you are. Love is terrifying. It's supposed to be. If it wasn't scary, it wouldn't be worth it." What if I wait and he never says it?" Helen stroked her daughter's hair. "Then you'll have to decide whether you're willing to say it first." That night, Olivia lay in her childhood bedroom, the one with the faded blue walls and the window that faced Nathan's house, and stared at the ceiling and thought about courage. She had built a company from scratch. She had fired people, hired people, negotiated deals that made grown men nervous. She had walked into rooms full of skeptics and walked out with their money and their respect. But the thought of walking across the street and telling Nathan Hayes that she loved him made her feel like she was standing on the edge of a cliff with no rope and no net and no guarantee that the fall wouldn't kill her. She rolled over and looked out the window. Nathan's bedroom light was still on. She could see it through the curtains. A warm, amber glow that meant he was awake, probably lying in his own bed, probably staring at his own ceiling, probably thinking about his own version of the same impossible thing. 2 houses, 1 street, 15 years of silence. She pulled the blanket over her head and tried to sleep. Across the street, Nathan was not sleeping either. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, holding a framed photograph that he kept in the top drawer of his nightstand. The photo was from high school, junior year, the spring formal. He and Olivia had gone together, as friends, because neither of them had the nerve to call it what it was. In the picture, she was wearing a green dress that she'd borrowed from her mother's closet, and he was wearing a suit jacket that was slightly too big across the shoulders, and they were both laughing at something someone had said just before the camera clicked. He couldn't remember what was funny. He could remember exactly how her hand felt in his. Small and warm and slightly nervous. He could remember the way she smelled, like her mother's lavender soap and something sweet that he never identified. He could remember the way she leaned into him during the slow songs, close enough that he could feel her heartbeat through the fabric of his borrowed jacket, and how he spent the entire night terrified that she would hear his. That was 16 years ago. He was 16 years old, and he knew even then that this girl was going to be the most important person in his life. And he knew even then that she was going to leave because she was brilliant and ambitious and hungry for a world bigger than Maple Ridge Lane. And he was just a kid whose parents had died in a car accident and who was being raised by an uncle who drank too much and forgot to buy groceries. She left. She went to Dartmouth. She went to Wharton. She built something extraordinary. And he stayed because staying was the only thing he knew how to do, and because someone needed to be here when she came home, even if she never came home for him. He put the photograph back in the drawer and closed it. His phone was on the nightstand. He picked it up, opened the text thread with Olivia, and stared at it. The last message was from 3 days ago, a photo she'd sent of Lily's dandelion garden, which Lily had transplanted into a small pot and placed on Helen's windowsill. He'd responded with a thumbs up emoji, which was the conversational equivalent of a door closing. He typed, "Are you awake?" He stared at the words for 10 seconds. Then he deleted them, set the phone face down on the nightstand, and lay back on the bed. The ceiling had a water stain in the corner that looked vaguely like a map of Italy. He'd been meaning to fix it for months. He hadn't. There was always something else to fix. The porch, the truck, the gutter at Helen's house, Derek's office door that stuck in humid weather. There was always something else to fix that wasn't himself. He thought about what Olivia had said on the porch. The bravest thing and the most cowardly thing. She wasn't wrong. He knew she wasn't wrong. He was hiding. He had been hiding for years, tucked safely behind his role as the good neighbor, the reliable friend, the steady single dad who never asked for anything and never risked anything and never ever said the thing that would change everything. Because saying it would mean admitting that he wanted more than he had. And admitting that he wanted more meant admitting that what he had, his job, his house, his quiet little life, wasn't enough. And if it wasn't enough, then what was the point of all those years of convincing himself it was? He closed his eyes. Somewhere across the street, a light went out. Helen's second surgery was scheduled for October 17th. Dr. Moran sat with Olivia in his office 2 days before and explained it plainly. The catheter repair from the first procedure wasn't holding. The valve was deteriorating faster than they'd hoped. Open heart surgery was no longer optional. It was the only option. "I want to be honest with you, Olivia," he said. He was a man in his early 60s, gray-haired and soft-spoken, the kind of doctor who looked you in the eye when the news was bad. Your mother's age and her overall cardiac health make this a higher-risk procedure than it would be for a younger patient. The surgical team is excellent. I trust them completely. But I'd be doing you a disservice if I told you there was nothing to worry about. "What are the numbers?" Olivia asked. She was sitting very straight in the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap, her face composed. The CEO face. The face that processed information without flinching. 70% success rate for a full recovery. 20% chance of complications, infection, stroke, extended ICU stay. And 10% she doesn't make it. 10% the outcome is not what we want. Yes. Olivia nodded. She thanked him. She shook his hand. She walked out of his office, down the hallway, through the lobby, and into the parking lot where she sat in her rented Audi and gripped the steering wheel with both hands and tried to remember how to breathe. 10%. 1 in 10. She had built her entire career on calculating risk, on weighing probabilities, on making decisions based on data rather than emotion. She had walked away from deals with better odds than this without losing sleep. But this wasn't a deal. This was her mother's heartbeat, and no amount of data could make 10% feel like a number instead of a death sentence. She drove home. Helen was on the couch reading a novel, an Afghan pulled over her legs, a cup of tea on the side table. She looked up when Olivia walked in, and she read her daughter's face the way she always did, quickly, accurately, without asking for confirmation. "That bad?" Helen said. "It's fine. The doctor says the team is excellent." "Olivia, sit down." Olivia sat. Not on the chair across from the couch, but right beside her mother, close enough that their shoulders touched. Helen set the book aside and took her daughter's hand. "I already know the numbers," Helen said. "Dr. Moran told me last week." "He told you last week? Why didn't you what?" "Because I didn't want you to spend a whole extra week being afraid. 1 week of fear is plenty." "Mom, you can't just—" "I can and I did. Now listen to me." Helen squeezed her hand. "I've had a good life, a long life. Not always easy, but good. I raised you, and you turned into someone extraordinary. And whatever happens in that operating room, I need you to know that I'm not afraid." "Well, I am." "I know, baby. That's because you're the one who has to wait." They sat together on the couch while the afternoon light shifted across the room. Helen talked about things that didn't matter. The novel she was reading, the neighbor's new fence, the fact that Lily had started leaving drawings in the mailbox every morning, little crayon pictures of flowers and cats, and one very ambitious helicopter. "That child is something special," Helen said. "She really is. She looks at Nathan the way you used to look at me when you were that age, like he's the center of everything." Olivia said nothing. "And Nathan looks at you," Helen continued, "the way he's always looked at you, like you're the answer to a question he's afraid to ask." "Mom, please don't." "I'm going into surgery in 2 days, Olivia. I think I've earned the right to say what I want." Helen turned to face her daughter fully, and her eyes, tired, clear, unflinching, held a conviction that had nothing to do with medicine or odds or survival rates. "I have known that boy since he was 5 years old. I watched him lose his parents. I watched him grow up too fast. I watched him marry a woman who wasn't right for him because he was lonely and scared, and I watched that woman leave him with a baby and a broken heart. And through all of it, through every single year of his life, the one constant has been you." "We're friends, Mom." "You are not friends. You have never been friends. You are two people who are deeply, terrifyingly in love with each other, and you have both been too proud and too scared to say it. And I am 74 years old and I might die on Thursday, so I'm saying it for you." The room went very quiet. Outside, a car drove past. A dog barked somewhere down the street. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday afternoon on Maple Ridge Lane. "He won't say it," Olivia whispered. "I've given him every chance, Mom, every opening. I've stood in front of that man and practically begged him with my eyes, and he steps back, every time. He steps back and says something kind and careful and completely useless, and I don't know what else I'm supposed to do." "Have you told him?" "Told him what?" "That you love him." "No." "Why not?" "Because what if he doesn't? What if it's not?" She stopped, swallowed, started again. "What if I say it, and he says he cares about me but doesn't feel the same way? What if he's just being kind because that's who he is, and I've been reading something into it that was never there?" Helen looked at her daughter with an expression that was equal parts love and exasperation. "Olivia Marie Carter, you are the smartest person I have ever known. You graduated at the top of your class from 2 of the best schools in this country. You built a company from nothing. You have stared down men twice your age in boardrooms and made them blink first. And you are sitting here telling me you can't tell the difference between a man who's being polite and a man who's in love with you." Olivia's eyes filled. She blinked hard and looked away. "He's in love with you," Helen said gently. "He's been in love with you since before either of you knew what that word meant, and he pushes you away because he thinks your life is bigger than anything he can offer, and he would rather lose you quietly than watch you settle for less than you deserve. That's not indifference, sweetheart. That's the saddest kind of devotion I've ever seen." Olivia pressed her fingers against her eyelids and sat there, breathing, trying to hold herself together in front of the woman who had always been able to take her apart with nothing more than the truth. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked. "You're supposed to stop waiting for him to be brave first." The day before the surgery, Nathan brought Lily over for dinner. It wasn't planned. Olivia had texted him that morning. A simple message, no subtext, no hidden agenda. "Mom wants to have dinner with you and Lily tomorrow night. She's cooking. Don't ask me how, because I tried to stop her and she threatened me with a wooden spoon." Nathan had stared at the text for 5 minutes, knowing exactly what it meant. Helen wanted to see them, all of them, together, before Thursday, before the operating room and the anesthesia and the 10% that nobody wanted to talk about. He typed back, "What time? 6, bring dessert." He brought a pie from the bakery on Main Street, apple, Helen's favorite, and a bottle of wine that the woman at the liquor store had recommended, and a vague sense of dread that he carried in his chest like a second heartbeat. Helen had cooked despite everyone's objections. The kitchen smelled like roast chicken and rosemary and warm bread. Real bread, the kind she'd been making for 50 years, not the brick Olivia had attempted weeks ago. The table was set with cloth napkins, and the good plates, the ones with the blue edges that Helen only used for holidays and important occasions. This was an important occasion. Everyone at the table knew it. Nobody said so. Lily sat between Nathan and Olivia, eating mashed potatoes with the focused intensity of a child who had found her favorite food and wanted the world to know it. Helen sat at the head of the table, eating slowly, watching the three of them with an expression that Nathan couldn't quite read. "This chicken is amazing, Mrs. Carter," Nathan said. "Helen, I've told you 1,000 times. Mrs. Carter was my mother-in-law, and she was a terrible person." "Mom," Olivia said, "she was. She once told me my gravy was thin, at my own table, on Thanksgiving. To be fair," Olivia said, "your gravy was pretty thin that year." "It was not thin, it was delicate. There's a difference." Nathan laughed, and the sound felt good and strange, like stretching a muscle he hadn't used in a while. He looked at Helen, and she caught his eye and held it, and in that moment something passed between them. An acknowledgement, a knowing, a silent conversation that required no words because Helen Carter had never needed words to say the things that mattered. She knew. She had always known. And she was looking at him now with an expression that said, very clearly, "Don't waste this." After dinner, Lily fell asleep on the couch watching whales. Helen's nature documentaries had become a nightly tradition, and the three adults sat at the kitchen table with the last of the wine. Helen talked about the past, not in a maudlin way, but the way people talk about the past when they want to make sure the important parts get remembered. She told the story of the day Nathan's family moved onto Maple Ridge Lane. Nathan was 4, Olivia was 2, and Helen had brought over a casserole and a plate of cookies, and Nathan's mother, Sarah, had cried because she was exhausted from the move and overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger. "Your mother was a wonderful woman," Helen said to Nathan. "She had this laugh. You could hear it from 3 houses away, and she loved you so much. Every time I saw her, she was talking about you. Nathan did this. Nathan said that. She was so proud of you." Nathan looked down at his wine glass. "I don't remember her laugh." "I do," Helen said. "I'll remember it for you." She told the story of the summer Nathan and Olivia were 12 and 10, and they spent every afternoon building a raft out of scrap wood and old tires, convinced they were going to float it on Lake Champlain. The raft sank in under 30 seconds. Nathan dove in to try to save it. Olivia dove in after him. They both came home soaked and covered in lake mud, and Helen had to hose them down in the backyard like a pair of golden retrievers. "You were furious," Olivia said, smiling. "I was not furious. I was horrified. You were covered in algae. There was a fish in your shoe. It was a minnow. It was a fish, Olivia. In your shoe. Nathan was laughing again, and this time it didn't feel strange. It felt like coming home, like sitting in a kitchen he'd sat in 1,000 times before, with people who knew him in ways that no one else in the world did, and feeling, for just a moment, like he belonged there. Helen got tired around 9. She stood slowly, holding the edge of the table, and Olivia was beside her instantly, one hand on her mother's elbow, guiding without hovering. Nathan watched them move together, the daughter adjusting her pace to match her mother's, the mother leaning into her daughter's strength without admitting she needed it. And something in his chest tightened so hard he couldn't swallow. "Nathan," Helen said from the hallway. She had stopped and turned back, and her face in the dim light looked young and old at the same time. "Thank you for dinner, and for the pie, and for everything you've done for this house and for Olivia since she's been home." "You don't have to thank me, Helen." "Yes, I do, because I might not get another chance." She said it simply, without drama, the way someone states a fact they've already made peace with. "Take care of my girls, Nathan, both of them." She turned and walked down the hall with Olivia's arm around her, and Nathan stood alone in the kitchen and listened to their footsteps and the soft murmur of Helen's voice as Olivia helped her into bed. And he understood, with a clarity that felt like being hit by a train, that Helen Carter had just said goodbye to him. Olivia came back 10 minutes later. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. She leaned against the kitchen counter and crossed her arms and looked at him. "She's asleep," Olivia said. "Good. She wants me to do her hair in the morning, before we go to the hospital. She said she wants to look nice for the surgeon." Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together and breathed through her nose until the crack healed over. Nathan stepped toward her. He didn't plan it. His body just moved, the way a hand moves toward a flame before the brain has time to say stop. "Olivia, don't." She held up one hand. "Don't be nice to me right now. If you're nice to me, I'm going to fall apart, and I need to not fall apart until after Thursday. You don't always have to hold it together." "Yes, I do. Because if I don't, who will?" She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a rough, graceless gesture that had nothing to do with the polished woman who ran Carter and Finch and everything to do with the girl who used to climb onto his roof and cry about her father's disappointment and her mother's loneliness and the unbearable weight of being the person everyone expected to succeed. "I will," Nathan said. She looked at him, and there it was again. The question in her eyes, the one she had been asking him for weeks, for years, for their entire lives. The question that wasn't really a question at all, but an invitation. A door standing open, a hand extended in the dark. "Fight for me, just once. Just this once. Please." Nathan felt it. He felt it the way you feel the ground shift before an earthquake. A tremor, deep and fundamental, in the part of himself he had spent years packing down and burying under layers of practicality and sacrifice, and the steady daily work of being a father and a mechanic and a man who asked nothing of the world, because asking meant hoping, and hoping meant losing, and losing meant... He reached out and took her hand. It was such a small thing, fingers closing around fingers, skin against skin. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just a man holding a woman's hand in a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and coffee and 20 years of memories. Olivia looked down at their hands. Then she looked up at him, and her face was open in a way he had never seen it, raw, unguarded, completely without armor. "Nathan, I know," he said. "I know." They stood there, her hand in his, the kitchen clock ticking, the house settling around them, the way old houses do at night, creaking and whispering in a language that sounds like memory. Then Nathan let go. He let go, and he stepped back, and he saw the light in her eyes flicker and dim, and he hated himself more than he had ever hated anything in his life, but he did it anyway, because the voice in his head, the one that sounded like his dead mother and his absent ex-wife and Olivia's father on the phone, that voice said, "You are not enough. You will never be enough. And the kindest thing you can do for this woman is let her go." "I should get Lily home," he said. "It's late." Olivia said nothing. She stood there with her empty hand at her side and watched him walk to the couch and gently lift his sleeping daughter into his arms. Lily murmured something unintelligible and pressed her face into his shoulder, and he adjusted her weight and turned toward the door. "I'll be at the hospital tomorrow," he said from the doorway. "First thing." "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do." He carried Lily across the street in the dark. The air was cold, real October cold, the kind that bites your ears and makes your breath visible. He held his daughter close and felt her warmth against his chest, and told himself that this was enough, that being a good father and a good neighbor and a good friend was enough, that wanting more was selfish, that reaching for more would only hurt the people he loved. By the time he got inside and laid Lily in her bed and pulled the covers over her shoulders and kissed her forehead, he almost believed it. Almost. At 5:30 the next morning, Olivia braided her mother's hair. They sat together in the bathroom, Helen on the closed toilet lid and Olivia standing behind her, working a brush through the thin white strands with a gentleness that made her fingers ache. Helen sat quietly, hands folded in her lap, watching her daughter's face in the mirror. "French braid," Helen said. "The way I taught you when you were 9. I remember. You cried the first time because you couldn't get the crossover right. I was 9. You were a perfectionist. You still are." Olivia sectioned the hair into 3 parts and began to braid, crossing right over center, left over center, adding strands as she went. Her hands moved from muscle memory, a pattern she had learned in this exact bathroom, standing on a step stool to reach her mother's head, biting her lip in concentration while Helen held perfectly still and told her she was doing beautifully. "There," Olivia said, securing the end with a small elastic. "You look gorgeous." Helen studied herself in the mirror. She looked small and pale and older than she wanted to be, but the braid was neat and tight and exactly right, and she smiled. "Not bad for a CEO," she said. They drove to the hospital in silence. Olivia held her mother's hand in the back seat while a hired driver navigated the route. Helen watched the trees fly past, maples and oaks exploding in reds and golds, the full fury of a Vermont October, and said very quietly, "I love this time of year." "Me too," Olivia said. "Your father proposed to me in October. Did I ever tell you that?" "You told me once when I was in college." "It was raining. We were standing under a tree on the Boston Common. He had a ring in his coat pocket and a speech prepared, and I said yes before he finished the first sentence." She paused. "He was a different man back then, before the company, before the money, before he decided that success was more important than love." "Mom, I'm not criticizing him. I'm warning you. Don't let anyone convince you that ambition and love are on opposite sides of a scale. They're not. The people who tell you that are the people who chose wrong and don't want to admit it." The hospital was cold and bright and smelled like antiseptic and institutional coffee. They checked in at the surgical wing. A nurse brought Helen a gown and a pair of non-slip socks. Olivia helped her change, carefully removing the sweater and blouse and folding them into a bag, trying not to notice how thin her mother had become, how the bones of her shoulders pressed against skin that seemed too loose, too fragile, too close to the surface. Nathan arrived at 7:15. He walked into the pre-op room carrying 2 cups of coffee and looking like he hadn't slept. Helen saw him and reached out both hands. "There he is," she said. He sat beside her bed and held her hands and talked to her about nothing important, about the weather, about Lily's latest crusade against toast, about the fact that Derek had somehow managed to order the wrong brake pads for the 3rd time in a month. "That boy needs a spreadsheet," Helen said. "That boy needs adult supervision." Helen laughed, and the sound bounced off the sterile walls and made the room feel momentarily human. Then the surgical team came in, the anesthesiologist, the surgeon, 2 nurses, and the room shifted into a different register, clinical, precise, the language of procedures and risks and consent forms. Olivia signed the papers. Her hand was steady. Her handwriting was not. The nurse asked them to say their goodbyes. The word goodbye hung in the air like smoke. Helen looked at Nathan first. "You're a good man, Nathan Hayes. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise." "I won't, Helen." "Liar." She smiled. Then she turned to Olivia. "Come here." Olivia leaned down, and Helen put both arms around her daughter and held on with a strength that seemed impossible for a woman about to go under a surgeon's knife. "I'm so proud of you," Helen whispered. "Whatever happens today, I need you to know that. I'm so proud of the woman you became. Mom, you're going to be fine. You just I know, but I needed to say it, just in case." They took her away at 7:45. The doors swung closed behind the gurney, and Olivia stood in the empty pre-op room staring at those doors, and the coffee Nathan had brought her went cold in her hand, untouched. The waiting room became their whole world for the next 5 hours. Nathan sat beside Olivia in the same plastic chairs where they had sat during the first surgery. This time there were no words, no reassurances, no small talk to fill the silence. Olivia sat with her hands clenched in her lap, staring at a point on the opposite wall that she seemed to see right through, and Nathan sat next to her, close enough that their arms touched, and he did not move away. At the 2-hour mark, Olivia's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Her father. She silenced it. It rang again 10 minutes later. She silenced it again. The third time, Nathan looked at her. "You want me to answer it?" "No, I want him to stop calling." "Olivia, he wants to know how the surgery is going so he can start planning what happens after. He's not worried about her. He's worried about the logistics. He's always worried about the logistics." Nathan said nothing. He reached over and took the phone from her hands, turned it off completely, and set it face down on the chair beside him. She looked at him, and for one brief moment, her face softened into something that looked like gratitude and ache, and a love so enormous it scared her. "Thank you," she said. "Yeah." At the 4-hour mark, a nurse came out. Update. The surgery was ongoing. The team was working carefully. No complications so far. Could be another hour or two. Olivia nodded. The nurse left. "I can't do this," Olivia said. Her voice was barely audible. "I can't sit here and wait for someone to come through that door and tell me whether my mother is alive or dead." "Yes, you can." "How do you know?" "Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and you've been doing impossible things your entire life, and this is just one more." She turned to him, and her eyes were full, and her chin was trembling, and the mask, the CEO, the Dartmouth graduate, the fortune profile, the woman who never broke, the mask was gone. Just gone. Like it had never existed. "I can't lose her, Nathan. She's all I have." He looked at her, and the thing he wanted to say, "She's not all you have me, you've always had me," pressed against the inside of his chest like a fist against a locked door. He didn't say it. He put his arm around her and she turned into him and pressed her face against his shoulder, and he held her while she cried in a surgical waiting room under fluorescent lights. And he stared at the wall and felt his own heart breaking in a way that had nothing to do with Helen Carter and everything to do with the fact that the woman in his arms was falling apart, and the only thing that could put her back together was the one thing he was too afraid to give her. At 1:47 p.m., Dr. Moran walked through the doors. His face told the story before his mouth did. Olivia knew before he spoke. She knew from the way Dr. Moran's shoulders sat, heavy, angled forward, carrying the weight of words he had delivered before but never got used to delivering. She knew from the way he didn't smile. She knew from the way he looked at her first, then at Nathan, then back at her, as if deciding who in this room was strong enough to hear what he was about to say. "We did everything we could," he began. And Olivia stopped hearing him. She heard fragments, phrases that floated through the air like debris from an explosion. Cardiac arrest during the procedure, resuscitation attempts, 47 minutes, every available intervention. The team worked tirelessly. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." She was standing. She didn't remember standing up. Her hands were at her sides. Her body was doing the thing it always did in a crisis, going rigid, going cold, shutting down the soft parts and leaving only the architecture, the skeleton, the frame, the structure that held everything up when everything else collapsed. Nathan was beside her. She could feel him there, could feel the heat of his body 6 inches from hers, could feel his hand hovering near her elbow, not quite touching, waiting for permission. She didn't give it. She couldn't. If he touched her, the structure would fall, and she needed the structure right now. She needed it more than she needed air. "Can I see her?" Olivia asked. Her voice was calm, eerily, terrifyingly calm. Dr. Moran nodded. "Of course, take as much time as you need." A nurse led her down the hall. Nathan followed 3 steps behind, close enough to catch her if she fell. far enough to give her the space she was clearly demanding with every rigid line of her body. The hallway was long and bright and smelled like bleach, and Olivia walked down it the way she walked into board meetings, chin up, shoulders back, pace measured, face revealing nothing. The nurse opened a door. Inside, Helen Carter lay on a hospital bed with the sheets pulled up to her chest and her hands folded neatly over the blanket, as if someone had arranged her to look peaceful. Her eyes were closed. The French braid Olivia had done that morning was still intact, neat and tight, exactly the way Helen had wanted it. Olivia stood in the doorway for a long time. Then she walked in and sat in the chair beside the bed and took her mother's hand. It was cold. That was the first thing she noticed. Helen's hands had always been cool. She used to joke about it, say it meant she had a warm heart. But this was different. This was absence. This was the temperature of a body that was no longer being lived in. "Hey, Mom," Olivia said quietly. The room was silent except for the hum of the ventilation system. No monitor beeping, no oxygen machine hissing. Just silence and the faint, sterile smell of a room designed for endings. "I braided your hair this morning," Olivia continued, and her voice was steady, somehow, by some miracle of willpower and denial, and the last remaining fragment of the structure she was clinging to. "You look beautiful. You always looked beautiful, even when you said you didn't, especially then." She pressed Helen's hand against her cheek. "I should have come home sooner. I know I keep saying that, and I know you would tell me to stop saying it, and I know you'd be right, but I should have. I should have been here for more than just the emergencies. I should have been here for the boring Tuesday afternoons and the bad soup and the whale documentaries and the garden. I should have helped you with the garden." Her voice cracked. A small crack, hairline barely visible. She pressed her lips together and held on. "Dad called during the surgery. I didn't answer. I know you would have told me to answer. You always told me to be gracious, even with people who didn't deserve it." She paused. "I'll try for you. I'll try." She sat there for 20 minutes. She didn't cry. She held her mother's hand and talked to her about things that didn't matter. The bread she still couldn't make, the pile of dandelion drawings on the windowsill, the way Lily said, "obviously," like it was a complete sentence. She talked until there was nothing left to say, and then she sat in the silence and let it fill the space where her mother's voice should have been. When she finally stood up, her legs were numb. She leaned down and kissed Helen's forehead, the skin cool and smooth against her lips, and whispered something so quiet that not even the walls could hear it. Then she walked out. Nathan was in the hallway. He was leaning against the wall with his arms crossed and his head down, and when she appeared, he straightened and looked at her with an expression that was trying very hard to be steady and not quite succeeding. "I need to go home," Olivia said. "Okay. I need to go home, and I need to call the funeral home, and I need to call my father, and I need to—" She stopped, made a list in her head, reordered it, prioritized. This was what she did. This was how she survived. "I need to make arrangements. Olivia, I'm fine." "You're not fine." "I know I'm not fine, but I will be once I have a plan." "I need a plan, Nathan. I need something to do." He drove her home. She sat in the passenger seat of his truck with her hands in her lap and her eyes fixed on the windshield, watching the trees blur past in their impossible autumn colors. All that red and gold, all that beauty, cruel and indifferent, and completely unconcerned with the fact that Helen Carter had died at 1:47 on a Thursday afternoon in October. When they pulled into the driveway of Helen's house, Olivia didn't move. She sat in the truck staring at the front door, and Nathan sat beside her, and neither of them spoke. "She told me something," Olivia said finally, "the night before the surgery. She said not to let anyone convince me that ambition and love are on opposite sides of a scale." Nathan looked at her. "That sounds like Helen. She was talking about my father, but she was also talking about you." He didn't respond. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white, and he stared straight ahead like a man bracing for impact. "I can't do this right now," Olivia said. "I can't have this conversation right now. My mother just died and I have to... There are things I need to do, but I need you to know that I heard what she said, and I'm not going to pretend I didn't." She got out of the truck, closed the door, and walked into the house. Nathan sat in the driveway for 5 minutes. Then he drove home, picked up Lily from Karen's house, made dinner, helped with homework, read a bedtime story, and went to his room and sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the photograph in the top drawer that he didn't open. He didn't need to open it. He could see it with his eyes closed. The green dress, the borrowed jacket, the laugh. The girl who became the woman who was across the street right now, alone in a house that still smelled like her dead mother's cooking, making phone calls and writing lists, and holding herself together with nothing but willpower and habit and the brittle architecture of a person who had been strong for so long she didn't know how to stop. He should go over there. He should knock on the door and walk in and sit beside her and hold her and tell her the truth. The whole truth. Not the careful, measured, polite version he'd been hiding behind for 15 years, but the real thing. Raw and ugly and terrifying and undeniable. He should. He didn't. The funeral was on a Sunday, 4 days later. It rained because of course it rained. A cold, steady October rain that turned the cemetery into soft mud and made the canopy over the graveside billow and snap in the wind. Half the town came. Helen Carter had been part of Maple Ridge Lane for almost 40 years, and the people who knew her, the neighbors, the pharmacist, the woman at the post office, the families she had fed and helped and comforted through their own losses, they all came, and they all stood in the rain, and they all told Olivia how sorry they were. Olivia stood at the grave in a black dress and a coat she'd bought in Boston 3 years ago for a different occasion entirely. Her hair was down. Her eyes were dry. She shook hands and accepted condolences and said, "Thank you." So many times the words lost all meaning, became just sounds, empty syllables that her mouth produced while her mind went somewhere far away and dark and quiet. Richard Carter did not attend. He sent flowers and a card. The card said, "Your mother was a remarkable woman. I'll always be grateful for the years we had together. Dad." Olivia read it once, put it in her coat pocket, and didn't mention it to anyone. Nathan stood near the back of the crowd with Lily, who was holding a small bouquet of dandelions she had picked from the yard that morning. When the service ended and the crowd began to thin, Lily walked up to the grave, placed the dandelions on the casket, and said, "These are for you, Mrs. Carter. I hope they have whales where you are." Several people cried. Nathan looked away. Olivia pressed her hand over her mouth and closed her eyes, and that was the closest she came to breaking all day. Afterward, there was food at Helen's house, casseroles and cold cuts and baked goods delivered by neighbors who showed their grief through flour and butter. The living room filled with people talking in hushed voices, eating off paper plates, telling stories about Helen. Olivia moved through the crowd like a ghost, pouring coffee and accepting hugs and laughing when someone told a funny story about her mother's competitive streak at the annual town picnic. Nathan watched her from across the room. He knew what she was doing. She was performing. She was being the gracious hostess, the capable daughter, the woman who could handle anything. She was holding up the ceiling with her bare hands, and nobody in the room could see that her arms were shaking. By 7 o'clock, the last guests had gone. The kitchen was clean. Karen and Derek's wife had taken care of it without being asked. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only happens after someone dies in a place where they lived. A silence that isn't just the absence of sound, but the absence of a person, the specific shape of a life removed from the air. Olivia sat on the couch, the same couch where Helen had sat wrapped in her Afghan, watching whales, complaining about underseasoned soup. The Afghan was still there, folded over the armrest. Olivia pulled it into her lap and held it, pressing the fabric against her face, breathing in the faint scent of lavender and something medicinal that she would never smell again after it faded. She heard the front door open. She didn't look up. Nathan walked in. He'd gone home to put Lily to bed, and he'd come back because the thought of Olivia sitting in this house alone was something he physically could not tolerate. He stood in the living room doorway and looked at her, and she looked at him, and the distance between them was 12 feet and 15 years and every single word they had never said. "You should go home," she said. "It's late. I'm not leaving you alone tonight. I've been alone before. Not like this." She looked at him for a long time. Then she moved over on the couch, making space, and he sat down beside her. Not touching, close. Close enough that she could feel him there, the steadiness of him, the particular gravity of a man who showed up and stayed and never asked for credit. "My father wants me to come back to Boston," she said. "He called this morning, 3 hours after the funeral. He said the board is getting restless." "What did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think about it." "And?" "And I'm thinking about it." She paused. "There's nothing keeping me here now. The house needs to be dealt with, Mom's estate, her things. I can do most of that remotely. And the company. He's right about the company, Nathan. I can't run it from a kitchen table forever." Nathan stared at the dark television screen. "When would you go?" "End of the week, maybe sooner. My assistant already booked a car for Friday morning." Friday morning, 5 days. 5 days, and she would get in a car and drive to the airport and fly to Boston and walk back into the glass office on the 43rd floor, and Maple Ridge Lane would become what it had been before, a place she used to live, a place she visited on holidays, a place that held memories she looked at from a safe distance. "That's fast," Nathan said. "What's the point of waiting?" He turned to look at her, and his face was doing the thing it did when he was fighting something inside himself. Tight around the jaw, careful around the eyes, controlled in a way that looked like calm but was actually the opposite of calm. "Is that what you want?" he asked. "Does it matter what I want?" "It's the only thing that matters." "Then ask me, Nathan. Ask me what I want." He was quiet. The house creaked around them. The wind pushed rain against the windows in irregular patterns, like fingers tapping on glass. "What do you want, Olivia?" She looked at him, and her eyes were red and tired and grieving and full of something that looked like the last ember in a fire that was about to go out. "I want someone to give me a reason to stay." The words hung in the air between them. Simple words. Clear words. Words that required only one response. The obvious one. The true one. The one that Nathan had been carrying in his chest like a stone for 15 years. He opened his mouth. She watched him. She watched the battle behind his eyes, the want and the fear, the love and the doubt, the man who ached to say yes, and the voice that kept whispering, "You're not enough. You'll never be enough." She'll wake up one day and realize she's settled, and she'll leave the way Claire left, the way everyone leaves. "Olivia," he said, and his voice was rough. "You deserve. Don't tell me what I deserve. I am so tired of people telling me what I deserve. My father thinks I deserve a bigger life. You think I deserve a better man? Nobody asks me what I actually want because apparently everyone else's opinion matters more than mine. That's not what It is. It's exactly what you're doing. You're deciding for me. You've been deciding for me since we were teenagers, and I let you because I thought eventually you'd stop being afraid and just say it. But you won't. Will you?" His jaw tightened. His hands were clenched against his thighs. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down, calculating the distance, measuring the risk. "You just lost your mother," he said quietly. "This isn't the right time." There is no right time. There has never been a right time. There's always going to be a reason to wait, Nathan. My mother's surgery, my father's expectations, Lily's schedule, the company, the distance, the fact that you're a mechanic and I'm a CEO. There will always be a reason, and if you keep waiting for the reasons to run out, they never will. He looked at her. She looked at him. The rain hit the windows. The clock ticked on the wall. "I'm leaving Friday," she said. "A car is coming at 8 in the morning. If you have something to say to me, you have 5 days." She pulled the Afghan off her lap, folded it carefully, and placed it on the armrest. Then she stood up, walked to the front door, and opened it. "Good night, Nathan." He stood. He walked to the door. He stopped in front of her, close enough that he could see the tear tracks on her cheeks that she hadn't wiped away, close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something clean and sharp, not lavender, not her mother's scent, but her own. And he wanted so badly to reach out and touch her face that his hand actually moved before he caught it and forced it back to his side. "Good night, Liv." He walked out into the rain. She closed the door behind him. He heard the lock turn, a small, final sound, and he stood on the porch with the rain soaking through his shirt and his hair and his shoes, and he thought about what she'd said. "If you have something to say to me, you have 5 days." 5 days! He walked home. He changed into dry clothes. He checked on Lily, who was sleeping with one arm hanging off the bed and the other wrapped around a stuffed elephant named Gerald. He pulled the blanket over her shoulder and stood there watching her breathe, this small, perfect, impossible person who depended on him for everything, who trusted him completely, who had no idea that her father was standing in her bedroom at 11 o'clock at night trying to figure out whether loving someone was worth the risk of losing everything. He went to bed. He did not sleep. Across the street, Olivia did not sleep either. She lay in her childhood bedroom in her dead mother's house and stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain and counted the hours until Friday, and she wondered if this was what the rest of her life was going to feel like. This hollow, echoing emptiness, this absence of the two people she loved most, one taken by death and the other by his own fear. She turned on her side and looked at the window. Nathan's light was off. The house across the street was dark. She closed her eyes and tried to picture her life in Boston. The office, the meetings, the apartment with the view of the harbor, the dinners at restaurants where nobody knew her name, only her title. The evenings alone with a glass of wine and a phone full of emails and the quiet, relentless hum of a life that looked impressive from the outside and felt like a well-furnished prison from the inside. She could go back to that. She had done it before, she could do it again. But she didn't want to. She wanted a kitchen that smelled like rosemary. She wanted a porch with a cracked chair and a view of a street where people waved from their driveways. She wanted a little girl who said, obviously, like a weapon, and left crayon drawings in the mailbox. She wanted a man with grease under his fingernails who fixed things that were broken and showed up without being asked and looked at her like she was the answer to a question he was afraid to ask. She wanted Nathan. She had always wanted Nathan. And in 5 days, she was going to get in a car and leave. And he was going to stand on his porch and watch her go, and they were both going to pretend it was fine. And it was going to be the worst thing either of them had ever done. The rain kept falling. Olivia pulled the blanket over her head and pressed her face into the pillow, and somewhere in the dark, muffled space between the fabric and her skin, she finally let herself cry the way she had been needing to cry for weeks. Ugly, gasping, full-body sobs that shook the bed and soaked the pillowcase and sounded like a woman who had lost everything and was about to lose the one thing she had left. She cried until there was nothing left. Then she lay there, empty and raw, and waited for morning. Friday came the way all dreaded things come, quietly, without ceremony, arriving on schedule despite every silent prayer that it wouldn't. Nathan woke at 5:15 to a gray sky and the sound of rain. Not the heavy downpour from the night of the funeral, but a lighter, steadier kind. The kind that didn't rage or lash, but simply fell, patient and relentless, like it had nowhere else to be. He made coffee. He packed Lily's lunch. He stood at the kitchen window and stared across the street at Helen's house, where a single light burned in the living room, and he tried to convince himself that today was just another Friday. It wasn't working. He had not gone over in the 5 days since Olivia's ultimatum. He had not knocked on her door or called or texted or done any of the things a man does when a woman he loves tells him she's leaving and gives him a deadline. He had gone to work. He had come home. He had made dinner and helped with homework and read bedtime stories and done all the small, reliable, predictable things that constituted his life. And he had done them with the same care and attention he always gave them, because these things were what he had, and they were good, and they were enough. Except they weren't. And he had known they weren't for a long time. Maybe he had always known. "Dad?" Lily was standing in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, hair sticking up on one side, eyes half open. "Why are you staring out the window?" "I'm not staring. I'm looking." "Looking at what?" He turned away from the window. "Nothing. You want cereal or eggs?" "Pancakes." "You always want pancakes." "Because pancakes are always the right answer." He made pancakes. He burned the first one because he wasn't paying attention, and Lily informed him that it looked like a map of something ugly, and he flipped it into the trash and started over. They ate together at the small kitchen table, and Lily talked about school, about a boy named Marcus who kept stealing her eraser, about a science project involving baking soda volcanoes, about the fact that her teacher, Mrs. Woodruff, had a new haircut that Lily found suspicious. Nathan listened, and he laughed, and he loved his daughter with the same fierce, aching, overwhelming love he had felt every day since the moment Claire had placed her in his arms and said, "I named her Lily after my grandmother," and then, 6 months later, left. Claire. He hadn't thought about Claire in weeks, months maybe. She lived in Portland now with a man named Jeff who sold insurance. She sent Lily birthday cards and Christmas presents and occasionally texted Nathan to ask how things were going. She was not a villain. She was just a woman who had gotten married too young and become a mother before she was ready and made the only choice she knew how to make, even though it was the wrong one. Nathan didn't hate her. He understood her. Understanding her was easier than admitting that her leaving had broken something in him that he had never repaired. The part that believed people stayed. People didn't stay. That was the lesson. His parents hadn't stayed. Not by choice, but the result was the same. Claire hadn't stayed. And Olivia was about to not stay, and he was going to let it happen, because letting it happen was safer than asking her to stay and watching her leave anyway. He dropped Lily at school at 7:35. He kissed her forehead and told her to have a good day. And she said, obviously, and ran off toward the building with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders, and he sat in the parking lot for a minute, watching her disappear through the front doors, and he thought about what it meant to be brave. Lily was brave. Lily was 6 years old, and her mother had left, and she still ran toward things. She still trusted. She still believed the next day would be good, not because she was naive, but because she hadn't yet learned the lesson Nathan had spent his whole life learning, that hoping for things meant risking the pain of not getting them. When did he get so afraid? He drove to the shop. Derek was already there, under the hood of a pickup truck, whistling something off-key. Nathan parked, got out, and stood in the lot with his keys in his hand, staring at nothing. "You look terrible," Derek said from under the hood. "Thanks. I mean it. You look like you haven't slept in a week. What's going on?" "Nothing." Derek straightened up and wiped his hands on a rag. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a beard that needed trimming and an instinct for other people's problems that he disguised as nosiness. "Olivia's leaving today, isn't she?" Nathan didn't answer. "Karen told me. She heard it from Margaret. The car's coming at 8. Derek checked his watch. "That's in about 20 minutes. "I know what time it is. "And you're here, at the shop. 20 minutes before the woman you've been in love with since high school gets in a car and leaves." "Derek. No, listen. I've known you for 10 years. I've watched you raise that kid by yourself. I've watched you work 12-hour days and never complain and never ask for help and never, not once, do a single thing for yourself. And I've watched you look at Olivia Carter like she's the only real thing in the entire world and then pretend you don't. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You love her. She loves you. The only thing standing in the way is you being too stubborn or too scared to say it. She's a CEO, Derek. She runs a company worth $200 million. She went to Dartmouth. She went to Wharton. She belongs in a conference room in Boston, not sitting on my porch watching me fix a transmission. Says who? Says common sense. Common sense. Derek threw the rag on the workbench. Common sense is what people use when they want an excuse not to do something hard. You know what doesn't make sense? Letting the best thing that ever walked into your life walk right back out because you decided you're not impressive enough. That's not common sense, Nathan. That's cowardice. The word landed like a slap. Nathan flinched. Actually flinched the way you do when someone says out loud the thing you've been whispering to yourself in the dark. "She deserves better," Nathan said, but the words came out thin, worn out, like a coat that had been washed too many times. Better than what? Better than a man who showed up at 2 a.m. when her mother was in surgery? Better than a man who fixed her gutters and mowed her lawn and brought her dinner 3 nights a week? Better than a man who held her in a hospital waiting room for 5 hours without saying a single stupid thing? Derek shook his head. "You're not a mechanic who doesn't deserve her, Nathan. You're a good man who's too afraid to let someone love him. There's a difference." Nathan stood in the parking lot of Garrison's Auto Repair on a rainy Friday morning in October, and the words hit him one at a time, like stones falling into still water, each one sending ripples out in every direction, too afraid to let someone love him. He thought about Lily, about the way she ran toward the school doors every morning, trusting that something good was waiting inside, about the way she left dandelion drawings in Helen's mailbox, expecting nothing in return, simply because she wanted to, about the way she had placed those tiny flowers on Helen's casket and talked to a dead woman about whales, because she was 6 years old and she hadn't learned yet that love was supposed to be careful and calculated and rationed out in safe, manageable doses. His daughter was braver than he was. His 6-year-old daughter, who ate pancakes and fought over erasers and thought his haircut made him look like a tired wolf, was braver than a grown man who had spent 15 years hiding behind the word friend, because friend didn't require anything except showing up. And showing up was all he knew how to do without risking the part of himself he couldn't afford to lose. But that was the thing about love, wasn't it? The thing Helen had tried to tell him. The thing Olivia had tried to show him. The thing he already knew but kept pretending he didn't. Love wasn't safe. It wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be terrifying and inconvenient and completely irrational, because anything worth keeping was worth the risk of losing. And the only thing worse than being hurt was being the person who stood on the sidelines and watched happiness walk away because they were too careful to reach for it. He looked at his watch. 7:48. 12 minutes. "Give me your keys," Nathan said. "What?" "Your keys. My truck is parked behind a Subaru." "Your car is right there. Give me your keys." Derek grinned, a wide, unsubtle, deeply satisfied grin, and tossed him the keys. Nathan caught them and ran. He drove faster than he should have through streets that were slick with rain. He ran a stop sign on Elm and barely slowed for the turn onto Maple Ridge. The windshield wipers beat back and forth, and his heart was doing something erratic and painful, and his hands were shaking on the steering wheel, and he couldn't remember the last time he felt this alive. He came around the corner onto the lane and saw the car. It was a black sedan parked in the driveway of Helen's house, and the driver was standing beside it holding an umbrella, and the trunk was open, and there was a suitcase inside. Olivia's suitcase. The gray one she had arrived with 6 weeks ago. The one she had packed with clothes for a few days that turned into a month, that turned into the most important autumn of her life. The front door was open. Olivia was standing on the porch. She was wearing jeans and a sweater and a coat, and her hair was down, and she was holding a small cardboard box. The kind you pack when you're taking the last important things from a house you're not sure you're coming back to. She was looking at the yard, at the garden, at the stone wall, and the porch where she used to sit with Nathan and talk about everything and nothing, and her face was the face of a woman saying goodbye to a place that held every version of herself she'd ever been. Nathan pulled into his own driveway, killed the engine, and got out of the car. The rain hit him immediately, cold, steady, insistent. He stood in his driveway and looked across the street, and Olivia looked back at him, and for a moment everything stopped. The rain, the wind, the driver with his umbrella, the whole stupid, ordinary, heartbreaking world. Everything stopped, and it was just the two of them, standing on opposite sides of a street they had crossed 1,000 times, staring at each other across a distance that had nothing to do with feet or inches. Olivia's face changed. He watched it happen, the slight tightening around her eyes, the press of her lips, the small, almost imperceptible nod that was not acceptance but resignation. She thought he was watching her leave. She thought he had come home to stand on his porch and do what he always did. Be present, be kind, be there, but not there, close, but not close enough. She turned toward the car, and Nathan ran. He ran across the street, not jogged, not walked quickly, ran, full sprint, through the rain, across the wet asphalt, through the gap in the stone wall, up the driveway, past the startled driver who stepped back with his umbrella and stared. "Olivia!" She stopped. She was at the car door, one hand on the handle, the box still in her other arm. She turned around slowly, and the look on her face was cautious and raw and guarded and hopeful, in a way that she was clearly trying to suppress, because hope had burned her before, and she wasn't sure she could survive it burning her again. "What are you doing?" she said. He was soaked. His flannel shirt was plastered to his chest, and his hair was flat against his forehead, and his boots were squelching in the puddles forming on the driveway. And he looked nothing like a man from a movie and everything like a mechanic who had just sprinted 200 feet in the rain without thinking about what he was going to say when he got there. I don't have a speech," he said, breathing hard. "I had the whole drive over here to think of something, and I've got nothing. I'm not good at this, Olivia. I've never been good at this." "Nathan, wait. Just please wait." He held up one hand. Rain ran down his arm and dripped off his fingers. I've been telling myself for 15 years that I'm not enough for you. That you went to Dartmouth and I stayed here. That you built a company and I fix cars. That you belong in a boardroom and I belong under a truck. And the gap between those two things is too big. And asking you to cross it would be selfish. And letting you go would be the noble thing to do. She was staring at him. The box was still in her arms. The rain was soaking through her coat. And your mother, Helen told me the night before the surgery, she said to take care of her girls. Both of them. And I thought she meant you and her, but she didn't. She meant you and Lily. She meant the family she already saw, the one that already existed, the one I was too stupid and too scared to admit was real. His voice cracked. He pressed on. I pushed you away because I thought losing you slowly would hurt less than losing you all at once. Like if I never said it, if I never told you how I felt, then when you left, I could pretend it was fine. I could pretend I was just the neighbor, just the friend, just the guy across the street who fixed your mother's gutters and didn't ask for anything in return. But it's not fine. It has never been fine. And watching you get into that car is... He stopped, swallowed, wiped the rain from his face with one hand, which did absolutely nothing because it was still raining. It's the worst thing I can imagine. Worse than Claire leaving. Worse than every fear I've ever had about not being enough. Because at least those fears were mine. At least I chose them. But losing you because I was too much of a coward to say 5 words, I can't live with that. I won't. What 5 words? Olivia whispered. He looked at her. Really looked at her. The way he had been afraid to look at her since he was 16 years old, with no walls and no distance and no polite, careful, selfless armor between him and the truth. I am in love with you. The box slipped from her hands and hit the wet driveway. Something inside made a muffled thud. Neither of them looked down. I have been in love with you since we were kids, Nathan said. Since the spring formal, since the raft that sank on the lake. Since every single summer and every holiday and every time you came home and I stood at my window watching your car pull into that driveway, knowing I should say something and never doing it. I love you, Olivia. I love you. And I'm terrified. And I'm not rich, and I'm not impressive, and I have a daughter and a truck with 180,000 miles on it, and a kitchen tile I still haven't fixed, and none of that changes the fact that I have loved you for my entire life, and I am done pretending I don't. Olivia's face collapsed, not dramatically, not cinematically, but the way a real face collapses when the thing holding it together is suddenly, mercifully removed. Her eyes filled and spilled over, and she didn't wipe the tears because the rain was already washing them away, and she stood there in the driveway of her dead mother's house and let herself be seen, fully and completely, by the one person she had always wanted to be seen by. You idiot, she said. You absolute, stubborn, self-sacrificing idiot. Yeah, he said. I know. 15 years, Nathan. 15 years I have been waiting for you to say that. I know. I turned down a marriage proposal in Boston. Did you know that? A perfectly nice man, smart, successful, everything my father wanted for me. And I said no. Because when he asked me to imagine my future, the only face I could see was yours. Nathan's chest hurt. Not the dull ache he was used to, but a sharp, bright, expanding pain that felt less like breaking and more like something being set free after a very long time in a very small space. Don't get in that car, he said. I wasn't going to. She was crying and laughing at the same time, which made her face do something complicated and imperfect and completely beautiful. I've been standing on that porch for 20 minutes trying to make myself open the door. I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave. Why not? Because my mother told me not to let anyone convince me that ambition and love are on opposite sides of a scale. And because your daughter leaves drawings in the mailbox every morning and calls them a garden. And because you showed up at 2 a.m. and held my hand in a hospital and never once made me feel like I owed you anything for it. She paused, wiped her face, gave up and let the rain do its job. And because I have been in love with you since I was 10 years old and I'm tired, Nathan. I am so tired of pretending I'm not. He crossed the last 3 feet between them and took her face in his hands. His rough, grease-stained mechanic's hands against her wet cheeks, and he kissed her. It wasn't graceful, It was clumsy and wet and tasted like rain and salt and the accumulated urgency of 15 years of silence. Her hands came up and gripped the front of his soaked shirt, pulling him closer, and his arms wrapped around her, and they stood there in the rain in front of a black sedan whose driver had gotten back in the car and was very pointedly looking at his phone. When they finally separated, Olivia pressed her forehead against his and breathed. "Your shirt is disgusting," she said. "I came straight from the shop." "You smell like motor oil." "Yep." "I love you." "I love you too." She pulled back and looked at him, and her eyes were red, and her nose was running, and her hair was stuck to her face, and she looked nothing like a CEO and everything like the girl on the roof who used to tell him her secrets. "What do we do now?" she asked. "I have absolutely no idea." She laughed. He laughed. It felt like the first real laugh either of them had managed in weeks, maybe months, maybe years. The driver rolled down his window. "Ma'am, are we still going to the airport?" Olivia looked at Nathan. Nathan looked at Olivia. "No," she said. "We're not." She walked to the trunk, pulled out her suitcase, and handed it to Nathan, who took it with his free hand because his other hand was holding hers and he had no intention of letting go. The driver nodded, rolled up his window, and pulled out of the driveway. The black sedan disappeared down Maple Ridge Lane, turned the corner, and was gone. They stood in the driveway. The rain was easing. A thin line of light was breaking through the clouds to the east, pale and tentative, not yet strong enough to call sunshine, but heading in that direction. "My father is going to lose his mind," Olivia said. "I know." "The board is going to have questions." "I know." "I'll have to figure out remote operations, restructure the management team, probably hire a co-CEO or a president to handle the day-to-day in Boston." "Okay." "And your kitchen tile. We need to fix that kitchen tile. It's been cracked for 4 years." "Exactly." They walked across the street together, Olivia's hand in Nathan's, her suitcase bumping along the wet pavement behind them. They went inside his house, and he gave her a dry shirt, one of his flannels, too big in the shoulders, smelling like detergent and sawdust. And she put it on and sat at his kitchen table and wrapped her hands around a cup of coffee, and they talked. They talked the way they used to talk on the roof when they were teenagers. Honestly, messily, without editing. She told him about the proposal she'd turned down. He told her about the night Claire left, about the note on the table, about the way he'd sat in the kitchen holding 6-month-old Lily and rocking her and feeling like the world had ended. She told him about the loneliness of running a company, about the dinners alone, about the apartment in Boston that had a view of the harbor but no one to share it with. He told her about the photograph in his nightstand drawer, the spring formal, the green dress, the laugh he couldn't remember, but the feeling he never forgot. They talked for 2 hours. They didn't solve everything. They didn't map out a plan or build a strategy or create a timeline. They just talked. Two people who had spent 15 years not talking, finally letting the silence break. At 10:30, Nathan's phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "So, did you make it?" Nathan typed back, "Yeah, I made it. About damn time." At 3:15, Nathan picked Lily up from school. Olivia came with him. Lily climbed into the truck, saw Olivia in the passenger seat, and looked between them with the sharp, evaluating gaze of a child who doesn't miss much. "Are you staying?" Lily asked Olivia. "I'm staying." "For how long?" Olivia looked at Nathan. He looked back at her. "For a while," Olivia said. Lily considered this. "Can you make pancakes?" "I've never actually made pancakes. Dad can teach you. He burns the first one every time, but the rest are pretty good." "I'd like that." Lily nodded, apparently satisfied with this arrangement, and turned her attention to the window and the trees flying past, already moving on to the next thing the way children do, unencumbered by the adult need to analyze and question and second guess. That evening, Olivia called her father. She sat on Nathan's porch, their porch now, or at least the beginning of it being theirs, and dialed the number and waited for him to answer. "Olivia, I've been waiting for your call. Are you at the airport?" "No, I'm in Vermont." A pause. "Your car was scheduled for 8 this morning." "I sent the car away." A longer pause. "I see. I'm not coming back to Boston, not permanently. I'm going to restructure the leadership team and run the company remotely. I'll fly in for board meetings and major events, but my home is here. This is about Nathan. This is about me, about what I want, about the kind of life I'm choosing to build. Nathan is part of that, yes. So is this house and this town and the people in it. And I'm not asking for your approval, Dad. I'm telling you what I've decided. Richard was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was different. Not softer, exactly, but slower. More careful. As if he was choosing his words the way a man does when he realizes that the power dynamic he relied on has shifted permanently. Your mother would have liked this, he said. Olivia closed her eyes. She would have. I don't understand it, but she would have. You don't have to understand it. You just have to accept it. Another pause. Will you call me? Now and then? Yes, Dad. I'll call you. She hung up and sat on the porch and looked at the Carter house across the street. Dark now, empty, waiting to be cared for again. And she thought about her mother braiding her hair in the bathroom mirror, and the smell of rosemary and bread, and the Afghan on the couch, and the whales on the television, and all the small, ordinary, unremarkable moments that, when you added them up, constituted a life. The weeks that followed were imperfect. There were arguments about logistics and compromises about schedules and awkward conversations about what exactly they were to each other now. Olivia called a board meeting and laid out her plan for remote leadership, and 3 board members pushed back, and she handled them the way she handled everything, with precision, confidence, and an unwillingness to be talked out of what she knew was right. She hired a president to manage daily operations in Boston. She set up an office in Nathan's spare bedroom, which was really just a desk and a chair and a lamp. And she ran a $200 million company from a room that still had Lily's crayon drawings taped to the wall. Nathan went back to work at the shop. He fixed cars and drank coffee and listened to Derek's unsolicited opinions about everything. And in the evenings, he came home to a house that had someone in it besides himself and his daughter. And the feeling was so foreign and so good that it scared him sometimes. Olivia and Lily built a cautious, strange, wonderful relationship. They made pancakes together on Saturday mornings, Olivia burning the first 3 while Lily narrated her failures with merciless honesty. They worked on Helen's garden together, pulling weeds and planting bulbs that wouldn't bloom until spring. Lily showed Olivia her crayon drawings and explained each one in exhaustive detail, and Olivia listened with the same focused attention she gave to boardroom presentations, because she understood, in a way that surprised her, that a 6-year-old's drawing of a helicopter was every bit as important as a quarterly earnings report. Nathan began to rebuild Helen's house. Not renovate it, rebuild it. New shutters, fresh paint, the garden restored, the porch repaired, the cracked front step replaced. He did it on weekends and evenings, working quietly, the way he worked on everything. And when Olivia asked him why, he said, "Because your mother asked me to take care of her girls, all of them. Even the house." Olivia cried when he said that. Then she handed him a paint swatch and told him, "The shutters should be blue, not green," and he said fine. And she said she meant a specific blue, not just any blue. And he said there was only one kind of blue, and they argued about paint colors for 20 minutes, and it was the most domestic and mundane and completely wonderful argument either of them had ever had. One evening in late November, after Lily was asleep and the house was quiet, Nathan and Olivia sat on the couch, his couch, in his living room, with the cracked kitchen tile still unrepaired because they hadn't gotten to it yet, and probably wouldn't for another month. Olivia was leaning against him, her legs curled beneath her, a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. Nathan had his arm around her, and he was looking at the window, at the dark street outside, at the Carter house across the way where a new porch light glowed, the one he'd installed last weekend. "Nathan?" "Yeah. Are you happy?" He thought about it. Not because he wasn't sure, but because the question deserved a real answer, not an automatic one. "I'm getting there," he said. She lifted her head and looked at him. "Getting there? I spent a long time convincing myself I didn't deserve this. That takes a while to undo, but yeah, I'm getting there." She put her head back on his shoulder. "Me too." They sat in the quiet. Outside, the first snow of the season was just beginning to fall. Light, scattered flakes that drifted through the glow of the street lamp and disappeared into the dark ground. Not enough to stick. Not yet. But enough to know it was coming. What they had was not a fairy tale. It was not a story about two perfect people finding each other at the perfect time and living a perfect life. It was a story about a mechanic and a CEO, a single father and a grieving daughter, two people who had loved each other for most of their lives and spent most of that time being too afraid to say so. It was a story about loss, of parents, of partners, of a mother whose hands smelled like lavender and whose voice could fill a room, and about the stubborn, unglamorous daily work of choosing to stay. Because that's what love is, when you strip away the speeches and the grand gestures and the rain-soaked confessions in driveways. It's choosing to stay, every day, even when it's hard, even when you're scared, even when the world tells you that your lives don't fit together and your ambitions don't match and your backgrounds are too different and you should want something bigger, something shinier, something that looks better on paper. Love is a man running through the rain because silence finally became more terrifying than the truth. Love is a woman choosing a kitchen table over a corner office. Love is a little girl leaving crayon drawings in a mailbox and calling them a garden. Love is a mother braiding her daughter's hair on the morning of a surgery she might not survive, because looking beautiful mattered less than being together, and being together, really together, without walls or pretense or the safe, careful distance of just friends, was the only thing that ever mattered at all. Nathan kissed the top of Olivia's head. She turned the page of the book she wasn't reading. The snow fell. The house was warm. Across the street, Helen Carter's garden waited under the first thin layer of frost, dormant but alive, holding its breath for spring,